Kary Oberbrunner is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of more than a dozen books. He's CEO of Igniting Souls and Blockchain Life, where he helps authors, entrepreneurs, and influencers publish, protect, and promote their intellectual property and turn it into 18 streams of income, which sounds pretty great to me. He's an award-winning novelist, screenwriter, and inventor who's been featured in Entrepreneur, CBS, and Fox News, to just name a few. He has his bachelor's and master's in divinity and doctorate in transformational leadership. A professor at the university level, he teaches in the entrepreneurship and digital marketing spaces. Kary lives in Ohio with his wife and 3 children. Kary, welcome to the next level. So excited to learn more about you and Igniting Souls and Blockchain Life. But I first want to dig into a little bit of who you are as a person, because I know you've overcome tremendous obstacles and it shaped who you are today. So just tell us your story.
Yeah, so I grew up in Wisconsin, and I grew up with a stuttering problem as a young kid. And besides being having a girl's name, that's never cool back in the day. But I had a stuttering problem, and so basically, like any kid who goes through problems and pain, where I went was, instead of using words and feelings and expression, I kind of went inward with that pain. And so I went into self-injury. It started at the age of 10 that I can remember, where when I got really stressed, bummed, angry, it would express itself in biting. And so my parents kind of saw, like, hey, what's going on? Why is this kid kind of going inside with pain and stuff? So I went to a counselor, and I remember lying on the counseling form because it said, have you ever thought of suicide? And believe it or not, at the age of 10, I was there with my dad, and I said, I didn't even know what the word meant, but he explained it, and I said, no, I've never thought about that. But I remember honestly lying at that point. So, went through my teen years, and that turned into self-injury via cutting. And I know that's kind of a dark start for an interview, but let me just say that it was a private addiction. Nobody knew about it. Sometimes people use drugs, alcohol, other things in this day and age. For me, it was that self-injury. And it was really anger turned inward. It wasn't I want to die or anything. It was just I'm angry. I can't control it, and this is the way I can control it. As I went and grew older and kind of used writing. So sometimes people say, where did writing come about? It actually came about through a healthy way of processing pain. So that's what kind of led to my transformation. Specifically, in the scriptures, there's this certain poems called the Psalms. And I started to read those, and I was like, whoa, this guy's pretty intense, and this guy's pretty open, and he's talking about wanting to kill his enemies and stuff. And then I realized, Ryan and Stephen, that that's David, King David. And I thought, how can God say this guy's a man after his own heart? And he say these things. So what that did is it kind of blew my mind, and I realized, wow, I don't need to come to God all cleaned up. I can come messed up, and I can find healing. And so that was like a big move in my journey.
It's incredible. So you kind of already alluded to it, but I would love to dig more into the stuttering issue and how long that was with you, and if that made writing and reading especially valuable for you as like a communications medium. Did that make it just physically possible for you to communicate things that were otherwise difficult to verbalize, literally?
Yeah. Listen, I want to encourage anybody out there, because sometimes we think, oh, we grew out of these things totally and this type of thing. But I remember early in my writing career, even in my mid-20s, going on a TV show and literally almost having a panic attack. Like, even though I had overcome stuttering, the thought, and here's what it was, Ryan and Stephen, it was, I got to be perfect. So that's where the stuttering came from. The stuttering came from you got to speak perfectly, Kary. And if you don't, you'll fail, you'll be laughed at, you'll be rejected. And so there was so much pressure. So even as an adult to do a TV interview, oh my gosh, man, like now that I look at the symptoms, I'm like, yeah, I almost had panic attacks. What got me over that was being imperfect. That's why I have a huge heart for entrepreneurs and authors because I feel like they get locked up. They feel like, oh, I can't launch this thing unless it's absolutely perfect, or I can't go on video. Man, I create so much content these days, and so much of it is like not perfect. But I had to overcome that. And listen, when you have this perfectionist standard, what I didn't realize was I was a bad leader because nobody wants to be around a leader who has impossible standards. You see what I'm saying? So,
Hmm.
so in a way, I was like actually a bad leader, you know, where because I had such high standards for myself that I couldn't accept imperfection. I couldn't accept that in other people either. So, man, I had to go through a lot of stuff, a lot of therapy, a lot of looking in the mirror, a lot of blind spots. I'm not saying I'm perfect now, but I really have been okay with imperfection because even just a quick example. Seth Godin talks about. I'm going to use a glass for an example here. Let's pretend this is a glass. If somebody is dying of thirst and they're in the desert, and your product or service can help them, metaphorically speaking, like your company. I think you guys have a great company. Your virtual assistants and this type of thing, and all your products and services and other companies. If someone's dying of thirst, but you're like, nah, let's not give him that glass of refreshing water because there's a spot on the glass and it's not perfect. Seth Godin calls this polishing perfect. And as
Oof.
creatives, we get to the point where we think it can never go out unless it's perfect. And what you're doing is you're actually robbing people of transformation. You're robbing people of breakthroughs because you're too worried about you. And that's really what it came from. So pride is wrong because it's a fixation on how good you are. But guess what? Low self-esteem is pride in a negative way, and it's a fixation for how bad you are. And that's where my self-injury came from. That's where all that stuff came from. It was prideful. And so when I meet people who are excessively prideful, sometimes it's because they're focused on how bad they are. And I can really coach them strongly and usually shake them up and say, look, man, you are focused on yourself. And I can share that because that was me.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I love the example you provided because it means that getting off of the perfectionism trap doesn't have to be a lowering of standards, which is I think how the framing typically is that I have to accept something that is below my standard to
Mm,
be able to move forward versus uh, we can actually serve others. We can actually improve their lives. We're robbing them of the opportunities that whatever it is we do would bring into their lives if we don't get it out the door, if we don't share it, if we don't publish it,
yeah.
produce it, what have you. But you started with a stutter, you were cutting, you had a panic attack as an adult. This is something that has, clearly been a through line in your life. Was there a
Yeah.
catalyst where you are now some event happened or you got over it, or is this something
Yeah.
that you're still struggling with to this day?
So I don't have panic attacks anymore. I'd say probably the last time was, in my probably late 20s. But what I do is I love being scared. So we were talking before we started today about cycling. Man, I just cycled some crazy mountains. I'm scared of heights. There's no guardrails on these mountains in France. These are the toughest things out there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And by the way, my buddies bailed on me before the trip. So I literally had to decide, am I going to go by myself
Hmm.
and do this thing I've never done in a foreign country? They were supposed to go with me, but one of the guy's wives had cancer. And so he had to bail. And then everybody else was like, well, we're out too. So I had to look in the mirror and be like, am I going to bail too? Because I'm scared. And what I love about the entrepreneurial journey is it's scary. And I like to be afraid because it number of things. It allows God to show up. It allows you to feel alive. I've done a lot of research around flow by Stephen Kotler or Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And to be in flow, you have to be in what's called uh, 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 basically a gap between your competency,
Hmm.
right? And so you want what's called stretch but not snap. Too much, it's a challenge competence ratio, they call it. Too much challenge, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm done. And we see this with young kids. If you give them too big of a challenge, they just can't do it. They quit. Too little of a challenge, and they're bored. And so as an entrepreneur, you want stretch but not snap. But if you're constantly being stretched, you actually can get into flow easier. And if you never are stretched, you will not get into flow. And flow is the optimal state of human performance. And so you actually want to be in flow. And that's where we see brilliance in work, life, business, relationships.
One of the things, and I want to go, too far down this path, but one thing I just appreciate what you said, Kary, is probably the second reframing of something I know I hear often from a faith perspective. We hear often,
Mm,
when I am weak, he is strong, right? But a lot of times I hear that
yes.
framed as if the person, like we're operating out of weakness and he shows up. But
Mm,
like what I love the way that you talked
mm.
about when you're doing something big and scary, you can actually be strong, but you just don't know how in the world without God, right? Like how you're going to pull it
Ooh,
off.
that's good.
And so I love the way that you frame that as
That's
well. So
great.
thank you for that.
That's great. Stephen, you and I just chatted at Strategic Coach recently, and I'm so glad that we met through that incredible program. And by the way, big shout out to Stephen. I just met Ryan, so I can't brag on him too much, although he has a lot more hair than me. So that's a win. That's a
It's a
win.
starting point.
That's a good starting point. But
He
Stephen
tolerates
is a
me.
great coach. Stephen is a great coach. I've had the privilege of now publishing Stephen's first book and even his second book that's coming out. But I was talking to him as strategic coach, and I just said yes to a new opportunity to teach at the university level as a professor. And I had all kinds of fears because I have not been an employee in 11 years, and I love it. I love being an entrepreneur. And so part of me was like, whoa, do I want to go back into the academy? Do I want to go back into an employee role while I still am an entrepreneur? Can I manage all the details? I'm a visionary. I have a great integrator. Like I've been out of my comfort zone. I've been having to be stretched. So I just want to encourage people that is the goal. Like the goal is not to be at this equilibrium. How many times, Ryan and Stephen, have you heard, I just want balance?
Hmm.
I want to be balanced. Well, I shoot that down by saying, okay, do you really want to be balanced? Stand on one foot. And then what I do, Ryan, is I hand people objects and I say, okay, this represents your relationships. This represents your faith. This represents your business. And I give them all these things to hold. And I'm like, wait, stay balanced. Keep your foot, And I say, now, how much forward progress are you making by being balanced? And they kind of smile and they're like, none. And I say, how much work, how much stress, how much muscle fatigue do you have? And obviously the answer is like incredible. And I say, okay, now strike that. I want you to take a step forward. And what we don't realize is that walking, get this blew my mind when somebody told me this. Walking is a controlled fall.
Hmm.
So the only way you and I make progress in life is to be unbalanced, is to literally fall, but in a controlled way. And so that is actually more of the entrepreneurial journey, is being out of balance. And Stephen probably can attest to this, and you too, Ryan. Like, if Stephen goes and travels and speaks as strategic coach and has to get on a plane and then does massive teaching and then goes to connection meetings and is on and then like runs back and spends time with Corey and then goes on family vacation and then in job, like it's so unbalanced, but he's making progress.
I think that's so beautifully said. I've never heard of, because I've very much run into this a lot, right? That I want this balance, because it sounds like a universal good. And it sounds like one of those things. I mean, we talk to folks, who don't have EAs, and they think, that's one of the things that they're seeking is balance, to sort of have it all. And I love that reframing. I think that's just a really powerful mindset shift to kind of cast a new light on whether that's a really desirable thing to go seek out. And
I love my EA, by the way. EAs are huge. That's why I love your business, by the way.
You are preaching to the choir on that. I'd love to get into, the kind of freedom and growth you get from your EA. I'd love to learn about how you are stretching but not snapping. Those are all really interesting topics to me, but I would be remiss not to just kind of step back a little bit. And I want to hear Stephen and Kary, because you've had the opportunity to collaborate together. Stephen on the first book that's already been published, and now the second one that is being announced and published here very, very soon. Stephen, I know, you didn't sort of envision yourself as an author, maybe, as one of the paths in life. But I just love to hear the story of how that came to be, and how you and Kary collaborated to make that a reality. Because I know that, entrepreneurs that I talk to, they all feel like they have a story or a lesson in them that they want to share with others, that they want to be generous with. And, I would love to get some inspiration from your experience here.
Sure. I would say that I certainly have full of lessons, but the first book and the way Kary and I came together was literally like a lightning bolt, 3 a.m., type of moment where I had woken up early and I was doing some quiet time in Bible study, and I felt like I just had this download of this idea, and I felt compelled to write it. And at the time, it sounded super ridiculous because the idea was for a children's book to tell a parable of God's grace and what Jesus did for us on the cross. And so, as a writer, I wasn't even a father yet. Okay, so it's like, wait a minute. So hold on, like God, are you really sure? Maybe this is just like the indigestion here, right? But I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling. I hear like an audible voice, but just this gnawing feeling that this was something I was supposed to do. And so just in an act of obedience, I did what all non-author authors do. I went out and bought the Idiot's Guide for Writing Children's Books. And I literally had written the whole outline of the story in about 15 minutes. And so what do you do with an outline? So I started doing what I do. So I bought the book. How many pages, Ryan? You know me pretty well. How many pages of that book do you think I read?
I'd say you got through chapter 1 confidently.
Yeah. I'm not even sure about that. I might be fudging a little. I was skimming multiple chapters. How about that? I probably got a chapter out of the book. So anyway, I began this journey of just failing forward, really, to almost what Kary said, like controlled falls, except for mine multiple times were catastrophic, where I stopped for a while. And I said, no, this isn't the thing that God wanted me to do. And then again, that still quiet voice just kind of kept prompting me and kept showing up in different ways. And so then I picked back up the project, and I continued to move forward with this project with starts and stops and working through. And I was, I don't know, maybe 80% through the creation of the book process, but really was getting to the part in the journey where I just had no idea what to do. Do you self-publish? Do you try to get published? All these different things. And quite honestly, it was a passion project. It wasn't, we're
Mm.
entrepreneurs growing, you and I are growing a business here, we're multiple businesses. And so like, it just wasn't, I didn't feel, in fact, the book's available for free for download as a cartoon book. I mean, like just did not see like, I'm going to be a money making author here. But then I happened to be in coach and, uh, you know, I got exactly what I needed. I saw this handsome, bald gentleman across the room with, as he says, a girl's name, and we just got to talking, and
Yep.
he immediately got me. He immediately got the story, um, and literally, it was my most clear, um, one of my earliest, like really deep understandings of who, not how, because it was like I put my keys into a supercharged motor and I've been pushing a boulder
Mm.
uphill using forms of who, not how. I used Upwork people and I used, 99 designs and different things. But literally, I put my key in the ignition, turned it,
Mm,
and it roared. And Kary's and
mm,
his incredible team had a process that just made it very simple and easy. And it was if there's anyone listening, quite honestly, if you have one of those stories on your heart, in your mind, or something, that I want to care about from a business perspective, I would encourage you to do it just for nothing else, to really experience who, not how, because I had zero unique ability. I
mm,
had zero ability to make the things that needed to happen. Everything was in my incompetent zone. So,
mm.
Kary, you want to correct all my lies in that story?
That's a very kind story. I'll share this because this was kind of cool. I invited Steven to speak at my event because I knew that honestly, Steven, I don't even know why I picked you. I was praying and I just felt like Steven should come and speak. And so I think this was one of your first talks where you ever wove your faith into the message. And Ryan, this is the absolute truth. He shared, and there was a woman there who was so moved that she said she had been praying for her husband for a long time that he would be open to faith in God. And so I don't know, but she ended up on stage somehow. I don't know if she we had a Q&A or something, but she ended up on stage. Stephen gave her a book right then and there. And then she went home and gave this gentleman this book. So think about this for a moment. It makes no sense for Stephen to write this book. It cost him money. It is not part of his business model to be a children's author. But then he comes, he speaks, he shares. This woman is moved. She hands her husband the book, and this book becomes the catalyst. Because I got an email later, and so did Stephen, that it became the catalyst of her husband having a faith and then their whole family being renewed through Stephen's book. I mean, is that nuts
Mm.
or what? So I
That's
just share
unbelievable.
that. Yeah. I just share that to say sometimes we get asked to do things, I believe, from God, and it makes no logical sense at all. But then you look back and you're like, wow, was that a test? But it opens all kinds of doors.
And
That's
Kary,
an incredible story. Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
well, one thing that you probably don't know about this book, and maybe I shared it with you. I can't remember if we've connected since, but um, Corey's grandmother, her nana, has like been a complete Heisman in any conversations about faith. Corey and I've been married 20 years now,
Wow.
right? And she, like our entire marriage, she's been praying for her nana. And any attempts or approaches or anything were always just shut down really quick. And when that book came out, again, a children's book, right? Uh,
Yeah.
Corey's nana, who loves me very much, supported me and bought some of the books. And she
Yeah.
read it and she ended up accepting Christ as her savior and became probably my number one
Wow.
distributor of books. That woman bought more books, and gave them to her friends, and it was so
Wow.
wild because a children's book was the thing. So when Corey and I made the investment to do this book with you, it seemed at the time our financial situation is different now. It was a big investment for us,
Yeah.
right? Like it seemed like a big commitment, right? And I can tell you exponentially, there's no amount
Wow.
of money worth in the world. Corey's Nana passed away July 4th, and
No way. Ooh, I'm getting
last year, and
chills.
there's no amount of
Wow.
money that gave that could cover the peace that was received by knowing that she had that faith.
I did not hear that story. That is amazing.
Crazy, right?
And I got chills when you said that because, you know, Ryan, as a publisher, I look at my clients and I really treat them as if like they're my own kids almost, and I know I'm not that old. But when I looked at Steven and said, okay, you want us to do this book, I always say, okay, what's the business model? In other words, are you going to be, I have 18 streams of income around every book. And I've done some pretty interesting books, meaning like fiction. And I even turned that book, where is it? Elixir Project, a fiction book into 18 streams of income. What wasn't easy, but I did it. Well, with Steven, I said, like, are you going to be doing kids talks? Are you going to be building workshops for kids? And it was kind of like, no, 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 no. And I'm thinking, wow, like, okay, that's okay. We'll publish the book, but I don't know how the ROI is going to make sense because you got to sell a lot of kids books to, make a lot of income. But what Steven just shared is so cool because you're right. Like you cannot quantify someone's eternity based upon a financial, investment. So that's awesome. And Steven, I bet you'll have stories like that are countless. You might not even realize them until you get to heaven.
Yeah, it was a gift she gave me in the hospital. She pulled me aside and my wife aside, and she had told us, and she pulled me specifically aside and told me that was really the book that really just
Wow.
helped her. And so anyway, just really wild. I do want to take this, just considering our audience and everyone here. I really do. While I was sort of an anomaly, I would like for you to talk more about the 18 streams of income because I think there are people that this
Sure,
could be a
sure.
real, fulcrum for them in their business. And I'd like to hear what are other ways I could think about it other than maybe the way that you and I've worked together so far.
So the beauty of our model, remember, I was a pastor, and so I kept thinking I should be an entrepreneur. I feel like the church is too claustrophobic for me personally. So I kept thinking as a writer, how do I monetize this? And so what I did, Stephen, is I had to think beyond the book. And so I began to write books and say, well, I'm going to do speaking and I'm going to do a mastermind and I'm going to do a workshop and I'm going to have a membership community. In one of my books, I even launched an experience at Shawshank Prison. I don't know if you know that story, but that's based off my book called Day Job to Dream Job, where I literally wrote the book, part of it, in Andy's cell in Ohio. And I'm not from Ohio, but the book literally talks about your day job being Shawshank and your dream job being Zihuatanejo. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I launched this thing at Shawshank. Just since you like that, let me show you a quick picture. Here's the warden, and he
Uh,
launched it with me at the 20th reunion at Shawshank Prison, and I was invited to be a guest speaker. I mean, you talk about like, Morgan Freeman did not come, but the warden did. Bob Gutton. Point is this: I've been able to create six-figure businesses around many of my books, and even Unhackable, it was a seven-figure launch, Wall Street Journal bestseller. So, I've been able to do this for a lot of people after I did it for myself. So I think that anytime a book is a message, but I think some of us have a book that's meant to be a movement.
Hmm.
And when a book is done, what's the next step? And so, Stephen, I was on today with Ben Laws. I
Mhm.
was on with Jason from Ascendant Financial out of Canada. A lot of strategic coach clients. All of their books are taking people to the next step. And oftentimes it is within their business or it's a new business. So the book is what's called, the technical word in marketing is called TOFU, top of funnel marketing. Um, but it's really meant to be the lead generation that leads people to the next step. We call it Spark, Flame, Blaze. The book is the spark. Then you have an offer called the flame, which is mid-level, and then you have blaze, which is a high-end offer. And within that, you could even have up to 18 different streams of income. This is not, I mean, it sounds amazing, but it's really what Apple did. Apple has free iTunes for everybody. And then you get in the Apple family, then you get an Apple Watch, you get a MacBook Pro, you get an iPhone, you get AirPods. Like it's a buyer's journey. We call it an integrated product suite. And that's what we do with books. There's a misnomer out there that says your book is a business card. And whenever I hear that, I hate it because I'm like, whoa, hold on. What did you do with the last business card you got? And people are like, well, I threw it in the trash.
Took a
And I
picture of it
say,
and threw it away.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So nobody ever stood up and said, Ryan, this business card changed my life. But there have been people who've said this book changed. Look at Stephen's grandmother, Corey's grandmother. So books have the power to change lives if they're positioned in such a way.
What draws somebody's message, beyond just something that's deeply personal or meaningful to them into something that has the potential to become a movement, the potential to have widespread applicability, impact, inspire people to go from the spark to the flame? What
Yeah.
separates the average concept for a book from
Yeah.
something that's really extraordinary?
So books are written with three types of tones. One is struggler, Sherpa, or sage. So I have books on my shelf up above. I could pull it off the shelf, but it's got Tony Robbins on it, and it's called Life Force, and it is positioned as a sage. So what does that mean? That means the book is written in a way where it's essentially, I'm on the mountaintop, come sit at my feet. I'm going to share my knowledge with you. That's a sage book. There's books that are Sherpa books. That would be like Day Job to Dream Job, where I say, I struggled in my day job. I didn't know how to get out. I found a way up the mountaintop, and I'm going to come back down and I'm going to teach you and guide you and show you. And then there's books that are written as strugglers, which is like a Blue Like Jazz or an Eat, Pray, Love, but it's essentially saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't even have any answers, but I'm willing to talk about the problem. And usually it's a courageous book or that type of thing. So every one of these books can be successful. Struggler, Sherpa, Sage. What makes a book go beyond a person is to make sure it's transcendent. So what I mean by that is you cannot, I don't recommend branding a book as a memoir unless you're a massive Uber celebrity. Because, I wrote in this book about self-injury and my journey and stuttering, but I didn't call it Kary's secret name. One man's journey overcoming self-injury. Who would have read it? Maybe my mom, maybe. Instead I called it Your Secret Name, an uncommon quest to stop pretending, shed the labels, and discover your true identity. So a book has to be something that's applicable to the person. And there's a strategy to write it, even in the table of contents. With the look inside Amazon one click, we can see where the reader's taking, where the author's taking us. If the author's taking us to very unique and specific things that are only relevant to them, we don't see ourselves in the picture. It's kind of like Story Brand by Donald Miller. He says, look, you're the guide, not the hero. The reader is the hero. You're the guide as the author. So these are little tips that we, help our authors do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great framing. I guess I think one of the things that, in just talking to fellow entrepreneurs that are more, call it digitally plugged in, aware, folks who are active on social media, maybe Twitter, that sort of thing, is that there's this sense that, I'm sure people are always coming up with new excuses or blockers for why they can't, publish their book right now, why now is not the right time. And I think about this one of audience, like, well, I can't have a book right now because I first need to build my audience. And I need to listen to them, and I need to hear them, and I need to connect with them and consolidate all that audience and all that learning and those relationships and use that as the platform to launch this book on. And maybe, a good example in the marketing space would be like, a Gary V. Gary Vaynerchuk is so good at this, right? Huge audience. He's on stages, and then he publishes these books that seem to be instant bestsellers.
Yeah.
How would you respond to somebody who's worried about audience as the blocker for them getting started, and that just feels like a daunting or overwhelming obstacle?
Great question. We have Kickstarter. So Kickstarter is a way that people who don't have an audience can build a product or service through crowdfunding and giving people ownership in that experience. I think it's similar with a book. Yes, you want a tribe. Yes, it's amazing to have an audience that's pre-built in, but sometimes you get the audience by writing the book. So an example of this would be like The Shack. I think his name was William Paul Young or something like that. Or, just a lot of books out there that kind of went big time, and you kind of say, okay, who was that? Rachel Hollis, she had to show up at one point, and you might say, well, she had a huge following. You know how big her following got after. So there are these stories about people who have big platforms. Check it out, Ryan. We teach people to get platforms. There's 3 ways: build, borrow, buy. You can build the platform, and that does take a lot of years. Start your podcast, start your show, blah, blah, blah. But you can borrow somebody's platform. How many times have we seen somebody who's a no-name, Dr. Phil, whoever, who got on an Oprah, Spanx? Sarah Blakely was nothing. Not really, but her business was nothing until Oprah highlighted her. And we even call it the Oprah effect. Well, what happened?
Sure.
She had someone borrow a stage. So I do think you could build, borrow, buy. Of course, it's great to have a built-in audience, but sometimes you get the audience through the process. I do encourage people to share the result, the journey. In other words, launching a book's like having a baby. You can tell people, we had a baby last night, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm so glad. I didn't even know you were pregnant. Or you could say in the beginning of the process, we're going to pick a name. What paint should we pick for the nursery? Gender reveal. Like, you bring your audience in the process and you build. And by the time you do have the baby, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm part of this. That's kind of how a book launch can be as well.
I love that. Yeah. That's great perspective as well. My last question about just the getting started and the blockers to it, being in the EA world, you might imagine we deal with a lot of, we encounter and love on a lot of perfectionists. Sure. Perfectionists have really, really high standards for what sort of activation energy is necessary to get a new project started, particularly a big significant one like publishing their first book. And one of our strategies is to really try to dial in on that and figure out how we reduce that activation energy to the
Mm.
smallest meaningful step that that person could take. And oftentimes we'll talk about pushing that step even off to the EA just to have something that they can begin to work on and edit, because perfectionists seem to edit a lot better than maybe draft that first document, right?
Yeah.
So in that spirit, what's the smallest, most meaningful step that somebody could make today to begin that journey of publishing their first book?
Yeah. I think that an impact filter. I gotta go back to Steven's coaching. Dan Sullivan created this
Strategic coach, yeah.
process, impact filter and strategic coach. But until you realize what impact the book's going to create, you're probably not motivated. You know, Simon Sinek talks about a big why, but if I just say, I might write a book, I might not, I haven't fortified my faith yet with the big why. Here's what I do, Ryan and Stephen. This is a little coaching tip I teach my authors. I say, write a letter to yourself. And people are like, what are you talking about? And I say this, you write a fictitious follower with imaginary impact. And here's what I mean. I would literally write a letter that says, Dear Ryan, you don't know me, but I read your book and it changed my life. Let me tell you the story. And you would write this imaginary letter. And what happens is I've done that literally because I needed to have motivation. I felt like I should write this book, but I'm like, I don't know. So then I wrote a letter about day job to dream job. And I said, Dear Kary, you don't know me, but I read your book. It changed my life. I'm stuck in my job. I want to kill myself because I feel like there's no way out. I hate my life, like all this stuff. Well, guess what? A few years later, when the book came out, very similar was a letter from somebody named Kate in Australia. And I'm telling you, it's just weird, man. It works.
I think that's brilliant, and it reminds me of something that Amazon does in product design. That when they go and embark on a new product, that they will sit down and they'll write the press release apparently for the
Ooh,
product that
never
they're
heard
about to
this.
announce. And I think that's it seems to me a very similar idea, and it resonated with me very much on the product or service release, right? Of course, you'd have this press release that announces all the beautiful features and benefits and why it's going to change and impact your life. But I wouldn't have necessarily applied something similar to this idea of a personal project like writing a book. And I think, there's no reason for that not to apply. I think that's a great insight. Thank you for sharing it.
I never heard that. That's a good example of the press release. That's really cool. That's cool.
Couple, just a couple other things I'd love to touch on while we still got you here, Kary. I really, I know that you do, we've spent a lot of time focusing on the book, and I think that's really impactful for our audience. The world is changing really fast, and I know that you're doing
Mm.
also a lot of work with IP and
Yep.
easy IP, and so I'd love to just
Yes.
to you a little bit about what the way you're thinking about it and the way maybe entrepreneurs should be thinking about this.
Yeah, I'll totally give you the quick story. So if you look at the S&P 500, the most valuable brands on the planet, in 1975, 17% of the assets were intangible, meaning patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, these types of things. Most of it, 83% of it was cash, land, physical equipment, these types of things. 2020, we crossed the line that 90% of the S&P 500 is made up of companies that have, I'm sorry, of the companies on the S&P 500, 90% of those companies have intangible assets, meaning that Apple, for example, it's not the plastic, the parts that is the value, it's the IP. So that means that the listeners right now, only 10% of their value in their company is something that's tangible. 90% of it is intangible. So now the question is, well, gee, protecting that IP is one of the most important tasks. And so when you look at the current ways of protecting IP, it is slow, it's expensive, and it's very cumbersome. Why? Because we have friction. Why do we have Uber today? Because of friction.
Hmm.
Trying to hail a taxi was very much friction. Why do we have Airbnb? Because of friction. So when a frictionless technology comes in that's better, cheaper, faster, easier, it disrupts. Easy IP is our company that is literally disrupting IP. Patents still have their place. It's a 20-year monopoly on a certain technology or invention, but it takes $20,000. It has an 88% rejection rate the first time, and it takes 1 to 3 years. We saw this and we said something needs to change. And so what we did is we used my studies in blockchain technology. As you know, I wrote a book called Blockchain Life because I started to see a trend of the world shifting into Web 3 from Web 2. And that deals with all kinds of cool things. But as a publisher, I said, this is IP. So this is intellectual property for Scott Donnell, who created Gravy Stack. Well, guess what? On the back of his book now, we have powered by Easy IP. When people scan this QR code on any phone, instead of saying, is he really the inventor of this IP? Because anyone can fake a C or a TM or an R on a Mac or a PC and nobody knows if it's real. When people scan this, they go straight to the blockchain. And blockchain technology is amazing because what it is it's a distributed, decentralized ledger that you cannot fake and you cannot change the smart contract. So all intellectual property is based on the time to file. This is why I do not own the McDonald's arches, because I came 6 decades too late or whatever, right? I'm too late. So all intellectual property is based on time. Well, guess what? When you create a smart contract, you've created an immutable, unchanging timestamp. So nobody can say, Stephen didn't come up with that. I came up with that. The smart contract is on every computer in the world distributed, and you would have to hack 51% of the computers to manipulate the data. So we use that technology and we did create a patent around it. And here's why you should create a patent. If you're going to borrow money against your patent portfolio, if you're going to sue, okay, if you're going to sell. If you're going to do those three things, fine, get a patent, spend a lot of money, take time. It honestly is probably worth it. But everybody else on the planet who doesn't need the nuclear weapon, who just needs to verify that they were the first to file, they should use Easy IP. It's $100, takes 24 hours, and it's amazing.
That's so fascinating in the context of large language models and AI absorbing so much of other people's IP to produce their own slightly remixed or customized version, regurgitating other people's work. Right. This is one of the big through lines of the of the strike right now in Hollywood. Right. Is how AI is being used in the industry and how creatives work, whether it's in artistic form or written form, is being repurposed by large language models and other AI tools to effectively make derivative works of what they've created originally. So I think it's a fascinating idea to have something that is as fixed and immutable and as you described, a time and place and an author that is stamped and knowable, because the world is only getting more AI influenced, obviously, in the future.
I like that. I like what you're saying. I've even thought, Ryan, that someday we will have news that's issued with a smart contract because of all the deep fakes where you don't know what is being said and who said it. And so for that smart contract to come out from that source, you'll know that that is a legitimate news piece. So I do think that's what's going to make NFTs, non-fungible tokens, valuable, is real life use cases, not a Bored Ape picture. You know?
Right. Well, I love this topic. I think we could do a whole nother hour on this topic, and it's one that's going to be, evolving and continuing to grow. So I would love to do that. But in the meantime, Kary, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, I picked up so much from our conversation. Perfectionism robs others of your gifts and impact. Stretch, but don't snap to get into flow. Your insights about the unexpected drawbacks of being balanced and how we only make progress by being unbalanced.
Wow.
And I loved your brilliant idea to write a letter to yourself about the impact that the book is going to have on somebody as just a both inspiration, but also sort of a way of distilling down what the purpose and the meaning and the impact of that book is going to be. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
This was super helpful. Love what you guys are doing. And Stephen, so cool to hear about your grandmother's story. That is going to encourage my team. I'm going to share that story with them.
Awesome, man. Well, just really, really grateful for you, grateful for this time. And as Cuba Gooding Jr. said to Jerry Maguire, you're my ambassador of Quam, man. So keep it up. You guys are doing great work.
Yeah.
Kary, how can folks find out more about you?
Our company is ignitingsouls.com, and that's pretty much where we can help you with any of your IP.
Igniting souls.com. All right, Kary Oberbrunner, thanks for joining The Next Level.
Thanks, buddy.